Welcome to the Black and Gold Podcast. This is James Michael Brody. The podcast is about conversations with Black people who have either studied, taught, or worked at the University of Colorado in Boulder. Today, we are talking to Dr. Cassandra Young. There is no better work than that which helps improve the lives of others. Case in point, the work of Dr. Young, who earned her Ph.D. from CU-Boulder during the pandemic. She is shedding light on the abuses of young Black women and girls at the hands of sexual predators. Born in Oxnard, California, she didn't experience the trafficking of young girls personally, but she saw enough to leave an impression. Dr. Young is the first in her family to attend college, and she uses her platform to stand in the gap for those whose voices are too often ignored or are too inconvenient to discuss. After teaching at Sam Houston State University, Dr. Young is back in Colorado, taking a faculty position at the University of Denver. Perhaps one day, thanks to her efforts, society will move from yes, but to truly believing the victims of abuse when they try to tell their stories. Family, meet a true pioneer. Meet Dr. Cassandra Young. Well, folks, welcome back to Black and Gold. We are back, and yes, we are still doing video. No more audio interviews and all that, which means I have to sit perfectly still and look all professional now and all that kind of good stuff. Um, I'm really looking forward to this conversation with Dr. Cassandra Young, formerly Dr. Cassandra Gonzalez, who got her doctorate at CU. And I'm gonna tell you something, the research that you have done, my friend, and I think the benefit that you are performing for the communities that you are serving, I think I don't even have the proper words to really say that, to talk about what that really means. But so I'm going to thank you before you even get to that topic, but and congratulate you. But what I want to do is kind of go back to the beginning. Tell me, my friend, about the people who made you you. Where do you come from originally, and just talk about what it was like being in that environment.
Oh, that's a lot. So I would say honestly, there have been two people that have been really formative. One is my mother, who I take my last name after now, Toya Young. And I'd say the second one was my now deceased uncle, Kirk Young. So I'll start off with Kirk first. So Kirk, was like the fun uncle, but he lived with us, and he was a good uncle. I really do think that I believe he and my mother contributed equally to my love of reading, but Kirk was always giving me a lot of like superhero comics because he loved comic books, and I would read them too. And the comic books are what really kind of made me believe that you can make a real difference in the world. Like, obviously I don't have superpowers. I'm not going to become like Superwoman or something else like that. But it was nice to just read and have all the colors and have the images that are kind of hopeful and just showing people working through adversity and making a difference. And my favorite one was Batman, which I really do think sparked my curiosity into criminology, honestly, because I like how he like showed him like think through everything and like use his resources to think through. And obviously he has a lot more resources because he's a billionaire. But I liked that. I think that's really what kind of like sparked it for me. But another thing is that as I got older, I started to realize that there was such a huge bias against people who had previously been to prison. And especially like, and I'd say like maybe like late middle school, like sixth grade ish, just hearing how people would talk about people who've been to prison, like, you know, like they're violent, they're bad, you don't want them around their family. And he had been to prison before. And I was like, this is a loving, caring man, a
And
man who
this
believes,
was your uncle, correct? Yes.
yeah. He once broke into a car to rescue a baby that was stuck in there. And he once swam out into an ocean thinking that there was a dog drowning, and it turned out to be a seal, so the seal's fine. But you know, kind people don't do those kinds of like bad people don't do those kinds of things. And you know, with us, he was always incredibly loving and protective. So he unfortunately passed due to complications of surgery a few years ago. And so he was pretty, I think he was like really formative for like me trying to have this creativity of like, what can I imagine and how can I achieve that? And then also sparking the interest in criminology a little bit. But the biggest, most largest influence is my mother, not just because I take after her. My personality is like my mother's copy paste for the most part. But she's very strong, very loving. And from the beginning, with me and my older sister, she was always very honest about how the world was going to view us as two Black girls who are going to turn to women. Something I like to tell people because it's true is that like, you know, like Black families have the two talks, the sex talk, but also the talk for when you encounter police inevitably. But we had three, the sex, the police talk, but also the talk about what it means to be a Black woman in this world. And she was very deliberate with using the term woman because she flat out told us there are people out there just because you're Black that aren't going to view you as a child. They're going to want to treat you as an adult. And she meant both with violence and with sex. It was very sociological, even though she like you know, doesn't like do research and stuff like that. But it was a really good talk to prime me for how people were going to see me. And unfortunately, everything she said did become a reality. Um, and just more so, she was just focusing on how, you know, like you need to, no one's gonna protect you, no one's gonna come to your side and give you the shield like how they would for everybody else. But just know that it's not your fault and that you can come home and I'll help you as best I could. And she also talked about like really like, you know, the strength of community where you are, because the community will help you if you needed to. So that's really framed how I understood the world. And I think that actually did save me for a lot of heartache
Mhm.
later on, especially when we moved. This is in Southern California in a town called Oxnard. When we moved from California to Longmont, Colorado, where I now live again. And I love Longmont. I'll preface it by saying I love Longmont. Longmont's a second home to me, in addition to Oxnard. But it was hard being here, especially because when I was younger, this is like early 2000s, it wasn't as diverse as it is now. And it was really hard being like one of the four Black teenagers in the entire town, because there was definitely a lot of things that happened that I wish hadn't happened. But um, you know, I was able to understand why it did and that general reaction. So I learned a lot from her, but I think the biggest thing that I got from her though was like perseverance and being stubborn, because we are both too stubborn for our own good. And we work really well with spite, because I will say one of the driving forces, and when someone says like, you know, what you're doing isn't worth it, you should change A, B, and C, this isn't going to make a difference. So I just keep going on just to spite them. There's altruistic and then there's also that little like selfishness in there too.
Like, how you like me now?
Yeah, basically, it's like, yeah, well, I'll show you. Because I did have several people actually say I wouldn't, not my advisor is awesome, but I did have several people say, like, you know, you're not going to get a dissertation with that. No committee is going to pass you. Well, I did. So, that's just that. But it was really like those two, and just growing up and just really understanding a lot of the world, because they
Mhm,
taught me so much about it. So I understood what I was observing and what was happening around me. It
mhm,
was it was good. In a lot of ways, it really was like my first, I consider it to be like a really good sociological understanding of the world, because even if they weren't using that terminology, they were talking about constructions of race, constructions of gender, historical and systemic inequality. They were teaching me all of this from the get-go. So since I can pretty much remember. So that's really where like all this comes from. But my mother has always been steadfast in her support of me. Like anything, and me and my sister too, she's always been very supportive. Anything that I've ever wanted to do, she's like, go for it. I'll be here for you no matter what. And I think honestly, if she hadn't always been pushing me and offering just like support, I don't know if I would have completed all the program because academia is not always the nicest place to be a Black person studying. So yeah, it's hard, but yeah, my mother and my uncle, and it's funny too, because my uncle, after I started reading a lot more on my own, especially more like nerdy books, he used to
Hmm.
call me professor. And I actually am one, so it works out.
Well, now let me go back a little. Tell me about your mom. Now, is your mom like so you grew up? You started out in Oxnard. Is your mom from there, or did she move there, or how did she or the family end up in California?
She was born in Seattle. She doesn't have any memory of it. And she doesn't really like to talk too much about her family and her past. But I do know that they eventually migrated down to California. And they live several areas like Palmdale, Los Angeles, a few different places, and Oxnard just happened to be the place where she settled down, and just had me and my older sister.
Now, and now is she still there, or
Which one?
your mom? I'm sorry, is your mother still in California, or?
Oh no, she lives in Longmont with me.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah, it's nice. We're roommates and it's pretty good. We're all very, very close together and have usually
oh.
seen each other at one point in time too. So yeah, so we're still really close. So is my sister. She lives like a 20-minute drive away from us.
No, it's so funny. I remember you and I, talked a few years ago about Longmont and the challenges of being in Longmont as a teenager. And clearly the place is a little different than it was then. But talk a little bit about the Longmont you first encountered, and how you managed or how you tried to navigate that place.
Oh. So when we moved out here, I was like vehemently against moving out here, but I was 12. I didn't have a choice. Because I didn't want to be separated from my friends. But I ended up making my own here. My first thing when I got to Colorado was how spaced out everything was before they started building more. And Longmont just felt too small to me. I wouldn't call myself like a big city girl or anything else like that, but I think there's a middle ground between big city and like suburban. And I think I was in that middle, so it was kind of an adjustment. But I think the first week I was allowed out to do my own thing after we like did which was actually cool because I wasn't allowed to use the bus system in California by myself. I usually had to have my uncle or my sister with me. I was allowed to do it here. I think I was like at the point when I was allowed to do this, I think it was like 13 because we moved right at that like edge of my birthday, which is in the summer. When I was on the bus, a woman came up to me and she was like making small talk, which I thought was weird, because people in California don't make small talk with you. Um, and then she said, first thing out of her mouth was like, Longmont used to be a KKK headquarters. So I was like, yay, that's the nice thing I
Okay.
want to hear. And yeah, it turned out she was right. I don't necessarily think she was trying to do that to like scare me or anything. I think she really was just trying to make conversation, and that was like that weird, awkward as people get when they encounter someone of a different race. So that definitely didn't make Longmont warm to me. But after I started making some friends and just started exploring the town on my own, I really liked it. It sounds silly to say this, but honestly, the bus system is what made me really like Longmont. I liked that I could just get a pass and go to, that was like back when Borders used to be on Hover Street. That was my favorite store ever because I love books. I love that when I was allowed to and I had cash too, I could just go take a bus to the Borders, spend all day there reading my books and just being happy. Um, I'm not an outdoorsy person, which is weird because Colorado is like the place to be for outdoors. But eventually I just started to understand like people here because people I think in Colorado in general, but especially Longmont, like are genuinely nice. Um, so that was something that was really, really cool to me. And I will not lie though, there were some difficulties specifically with high school and middle school. So middle school was kind of an adjustment, like everyone's weird in middle school. My middle school, there were hardly any Black kids, so there were definitely times when I would be singled out. But my mother always told me like you don't start fights, but if someone like starts fighting you, you have a right to defend yourself. And whenever that would happen, because there were occasionally bullies, I would be the one that got in trouble versus the other one. It was a primarily Hispanic school. So, and even with me having my last name back then with being Gonzalez, it still wasn't enough. There was definitely a lot of self-selecting of like, Afro Latinos aren't real Hispanic people. We don't want you here. So
Mm.
that was dealing with that a little bit, but high school was worse. I won't name the name of my high school, but people local here will know it. When I went to the high school, it was actually called Chlamydia High, just to give you an example or a
Mm.
glimpse into what kind of school it was. The principal there really did not like me. There were only three Black students. One was an upperclassman who was an athlete, and I believe he was more tolerant of her just because she brought some recognition to the school. And then the other one was my friend who, well, ex-friend, we're not friends anymore, who is now in prison
Mm.
um, for something pretty heinous, actually. But it was always just focusing on us, selecting us, and just really being a bully. And because I don't take crap or disrespect from anyone at any age, even back as a teenager, when he would give it to me, I would give it right back. And he did not particularly appreciate that. His biggest thing was to always say, "I'm going to call your mom." And he never did. And I was like, call her. She'll tell you the exact same thing that I'm telling you. It was so weird. And the one time he got a hold of my sperm donor, all he said was like, "Well, call her mom," and just like hung up. So there was a lot of like in school suspension. And this is also the time when I started getting depressed from some other things that were happening. And, life just got hard. So I actually dropped out of that high school. I didn't finish. I think the last full year was my sophomore year. And that is also too when my grades started to go down, which was a big indicator that something was wrong because I've always been an A and B student. I even made like the honor roll and like in college, like dean's list several times. So that was a very clear sign that there was something was wrong. And when I went into the office to sign out, and my mother only allowed me to drop out on the condition that I would get my GED. She was very adamant about that. Um, he just like had a sneer on his face. He was like, "Oh, look at that," basically. And because I was no longer a student there, I just basically said like, "Oh, I don't know. I didn't say F yourself, but I said something else pretty like mean at that." And he was just shocked because I was still trying to be a little respectful as a student. But um, I will say though that just because that like I don't consider myself to be special in any kind of way, but like when we would have like creative writing assignments or something like where we could do research, I always had teachers that were very interested in it. But whenever he got a hold of it, because he also liked to step in and sit in on some of the classes where students were talking about their stuff, he was always made sure to say something bad about mine, no matter what it was about. Even if it was something generic that everybody else was doing, it was always me. Um, I honestly think that if I hadn't already had a love of education, he probably would have driven me from academia completely at that point. So, it was rough. He's no longer the principal there because apparently he harassed the wrong person. So that's that. But yeah, it was difficult at times. Although the real silly thing that would made it difficult growing up here, there were no places I could get hair products.
Welcome, welcome to Colorado.
Yeah, it's such a silly thing to focus on. And this is like before like Amazon got to like where it is now. And like now I can just order them, but still it was always so frustrating. And like for a whole year when before my hair decided what I want to do, I had to just basically like grease it down to make a really gross ponytail, which killed a lot of my self-confidence, but added to the depression. But after that, I was just allowed to get therapy. Therapy is good. And just kind of came into being like who I am now. And then I didn't get my GED. I actually did a accredited high school diploma online program.
Hmm.
Then I went to Front Range Community College, which is awesome, and then graduated from there into CU-Boulder, and that's how I got to where I am now.
Now, you went to Front Range. Now, was that when you started to really sort of get into the research that you ended up doing? Is that sort of the beginning of that, or?
No, the beginning of that actually started when I was a teenager.
Ah.
So, actually, no, I would actually say it happened because so my research is in sex trafficking within the Black community. I actually observed several of that going on when I was growing up, but this was in the 90s. We didn't have the language of trafficking back then. Back then they just, called children who were forced to do this like just prostitutes or child prostitutes, which is a disgusting term. So my uncle would walk me back and forth to school, and if he couldn't, then either one, my mother or the other one would drop us off, or my sister would take me back and forth. But she was usually in school too, so that was hard. My sister's 6 years older than me, so it was easy for her to do that. But one of the reasons why was because unfortunately that was present and on the route to school, to and from school. And I would, looking back, like I recognize that some of those girls, some of the people on there were children around my age, which I observed there was something weird.
Hmm.
And I knew there was something weird based by how strict my uncle was, because Kirk was never really strict. He hardly ever raised his voice, but that was one of the times he was like, you look straight ahead and you don't say anything and you don't talk to anybody, which when I was a kid annoyed me, but now as an adult, I understand what he was doing. Um, and that just like really interested me. But the thing that really sparked it, unfortunately, even though my mother tried to get in there, we lived in apartments and we were on the apartments on the ground floor. I was in my room playing, and then my mother was in her room, probably cleaning her jewelry or ordering jewelry from Home Shopping Network back when that used to be a thing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, HSN used to be the thing. I
Your
heard,
mom and your mom and my mom, yes.
yeah, she still has some of that jewelry too, but that's one of the things that she was doing. And my room had a window that faced the alley, and then one day I heard some noises. I thought it was a dog, honestly, because there's always dogs being dropped out back there, and I was like, "Ooh, a puppy," because I like
Mhm.
dogs. And I heard my mom like feet trying to get in really quickly, and that was not what I saw there. I only saw a brief bit. There was no nudity, but there was enough for me to recognize that something was going on, and then she was forced to give me the sex talk then and there, and why what little I saw was bad.
Mm.
Um, she also too, I think, something that really helped is that my mother, when she gave me the sex talk, emphasized consent a lot. And emphasize that, like, if you say no at any point you have a right to, and if you say no and that's not honored, that's not your fault. Which I think, talking to other folks, I realized that not everybody got that, but that's actually what kind of sparked it, because that stayed in my head. Later on, a therapist told me that that was actually a trauma.
Mm.
Because even though I didn't recognize what it was, I recognized what it was bad, because it did actually scare me. But um we moved about a year and a half from that, and then um was 14 or 15, I was in the dentist's office, and I was looking at a stack of magazines, and one was National Geographic. And the reason why it caught my attention is because my mother and my uncle were all telling me, like, this is why there are different races, transatlantic slave trade, all that stuff. So I saw the terms modern day slavery, and then I was like, oh, okay, because I was already interested in learning about like our history and how we came to be and everything else like that.
Hmm.
So I was reading it, and they're talking about like labor rights in Mexico, people being forced to work in mines in different African countries, and then they had a special section just on the United States, but it was prefaced with, homosexual something, and then America's children. And I was reading, and the pictures all had, like, throughout the article, there were pictures. Some of it is probably, I'm sure, stock, but some of it were of survivors. But for the American section, it was all stock pictures of white girls, and usually like with handcuffs or ropes around them a lot. And then they were talking, they were saying like, these girls are out here on the street, they're being trafficked. We need to help them. They're not victims of anything. But as I was reading it, the terminology they were using, like suburban, the girl next door, different things like that, it was very coded. So even though I didn't know about like language coding or anything else like that, instinctively I knew that they were not talking about the ones that I had observed. Mainly because one of the things I do remember observing is that they were often arrested. And unfortunately, that incident with the noises outside, the person doing that to the victim was a cop too.
Oh wow.
So yeah, it's just she also gave me the cop talk that day too.
Oh boy.
Yeah, so that was, and I'm a kind of person, like, when something interests me, no matter how small it is, I get obsessed with it, and then I just dive deep into it. Like, when I was living in Texas up until about a month ago, I got interested in tornadoes because of several like tornado threats that we had, and I just learned everything about or a lot about them, a lot more than I think I should have. But that's how I am. And so I started taking the bus to the library and being like, trafficking, modern slavery, and just reading all this. And nowhere in any of that did I see me reflected. And that stayed with me. Then I dropped out and then went to community college. And that's when I started like learning how to do basic research. The community college library didn't have it. And then I went to Boulder because I learned then that CU, you could actually check out books as a non-student. I didn't know that until then. Even then, the CU's large library, they didn't have anything. And the interlibrary loan system didn't have anything too. I was like, there's literally nothing about this within Black people. And that just rightfully grinded my gears, and I got kind of indignant. And then so after I graduated from community college and went into CU, I decided that that's what I wanted to do. Everything on was trafficking. And
Why CU? Of all the places, why? Because it was there, or why Boulder?
partly, honestly, because it would be cheaper. We're poor. My family was pretty poor. And neither of the parents had gone to college, so we didn't have like an alumni network to move through with. But I applied to CU and a few other places, but ultimately CU was the most financially sensible choice, especially with the cough. I don't remember Colorado financially, something like that. The thing that you get if you're a CU resident, that actually made it very good for me. But I did look into CU. I did learn that it was an R1, a heavy research-based school. And even though the library wasn't able to find anything because there was nothing to find, the resources that they gave me were just excellent. And I wanted to keep doing that, especially because that was what they gave me was a limited access to, because you get more resources as a student. So I was like, I want that. And then one class I was encouraged to take, it was called Comparative Criminal Justice, something like that. And a Black woman walked in, and I actually assumed that she was a student because at this point, it's like a year and a half being at CU, almost 2 years actually being at CU. I didn't see any Black professors ever. And now she was like, I'm Hillary Potter and I'm your professor. I was like, oh crap. Because actually, right up until that point, I actually wasn't thinking about being a professor, honestly.
Hmm.
Um, and it's like it was silly, because like I know, like logically, I know there's Black professors out there, of course, but and Black women professors as well. But that became reality. And then like we were talking, and then she was like, "You should do an honors thesis on this topic." And then it just spiraled on from there. So I'm really happy that I did choose CU. People told me I should try to apply like Howard. I couldn't afford Howard, or even a California school, which I did consider, but I did want to be closer to my family, and I just felt like CU is just the right place to be because it is a good school. I know it gets a reputation as a party school, but and it's true, like just like crawl through the partying, you actually do get a really, really rigorous academic community that can't be beat. So
Now talk about your last day there. Talk about that graduation, because you had an unusual graduation ceremony, to say the least. I remember seeing the photos and the little video too. But describe that and how first of all, how cool was that? Look, I'm one of a zillion people in the event center, and what do? We say, everybody stand up, move your tassel, now sit back down. Okay, you're done. You had a little bit more than that, I think.
yeah. Yeah, so my graduation is during the height of COVID, of course, in 2021. There was no plan by CU. I think honestly, this is when it was still new and the vaccines had just barely rolled out. So there wasn't a plan for CU to do anything. We were invited back later on, but I was already living in Texas and didn't want to pay that airfare money. So what Hillary did instead is because it was me and then her other student, Leanna Looney, who was fantastic, and one of my friends. So I adore Leanna. And so Hillary was like, okay, let's just do it at ours because Leanna and I are both first gen. We both were doing Black community focused work and we were close with Hillary. So she's like, okay, if the school isn't doing something, if the department doesn't have the means to do it, then, we can just do it and just invite one or two people and do it safely and be spread out. At that point, I already had one, no, I had both doses of vaccine and so had my mother and my sister. So we were good. And I don't remember if everybody else had, but it was at her house. It was really, like out in graduation, because there's like thousands of people you have to pay
Mhm.
attention to. The speeches are kind of cut short. They were allowed to be a little bit longer. And Hillary, I think, did a really great job of personalizing it to us, not just like with the research that we did and we're going to do, but with us as people, as she got to watch us over the last couple of years evolve, which I felt was incredibly intimate and just really sweet. My mom, who does not cry very often, actually did tear up a little bit. She'll deny it, but she did. And it was just really, it felt like a family gathering, to be quite honest with you. It was really lovely. Um, I liked that it was in a smaller backyard setting because it just like reminded me like being back, in the old hood, just doing like little cookouts with everyone. It was just
Mhm.
like the perfect encapsulation of just like what it means to have like that community with each other, and just, and keep saying the word community, but it's true, like that really close intimate ties of like friendship and mentorship and just um affection and love that I don't think is possible at the larger ones, just because you have to account for every person. So this was able to be personalized to us and what was most important to us, and we both shared it in that it was like trying to create a better world for both the ones that exist, but future generations of Black folk in this country. So it was really, I wouldn't change if I could like go back and do a magic wand and say like, well, if you could magically have the larger one, I wouldn't change a thing, honestly.
When, and I'm going to ask you another question after this, but when did it hit you that there's going to be three letters after your name from here on out? You know, that suddenly you're going to have, Ph.D. after your name for here and eternity. When did that moment really hit you what that really meant?
Sometimes I still kind of feel like I'm a grad student. I was at a conference last weekend actually in Denver, Law and Society, and I was talking to some older scholars there, and they're just like, yeah, but you're a professor too. You can also do, A, B, and C. And I was like, oh yeah, I am. But sometimes like it still feels like I think the moment that I actually had was when my doctoral hood came and I was able to, it's packed away somewhere. So otherwise I would just like show it. But it CU's once has like a beautiful like cerulean blue tammy. And that was the first thing I unwrapped because it was the first thing in the box. And then that like hit me that, oh shoot. I'm gonna have a PhD. It was like so yeah, I was like, "Whoo, this is real. It's super soft and it's heavy and it's hot." So that was really, I think, really kind of it. And then like after I did the defense on Zoom, of course, still because of COVID, and they're like, congratulations, Dr. Gonzalez. So I was like, oh, holy crap. I actually did this. And at that point too, I had a job offer in Texas. I was like, oh, okay, I guess this means I will be able to go to Texas now. Which was cool. And then nobody, I had invited a couple people from there, but everyone was teaching though. Somehow they found out too the job in Texas and they sent me a bunch of congratulations emails, which was super sweet. So I was like, whoa, I'm a doctor now. Although I hardly ever refer to myself as such, honestly. Like, I don't like when students talk to me, I'm still fine if they just want to call me Cassie, if that's what they want to do. The only time I ever really enforce it is if I need to like enforce a boundary of like distance and respect. I
Mhm.
think the last time I did it was shoot. I forgot honestly because it was so long ago, but someone was being disrespectful and they're basically they call me girl, which I don't like being called like, okay, girl. And I said it's actually Dr. Young. So that was it. But it was surreal. I'll say sometimes though, like I still like get whiplash reminding myself that I did a dissertation, especially like when I have graduate students in other universities like asking me like, can you read this? Because I read your dissertation and I'll try and do something similar. It's like, oh crap, these PhD students want to talk to me and want my advice.
Let's talk about the research because as you said, you've alluded to already. It's not really an area that a lot of people have delved into. Talk about what you found and what that journey was like, doing the research, talking to the women, and you know, what did you come away with personally and professionally from that?
Oh, okay, let's start with professionally first because personally it'll be longer. So I had to do a lot of pivoting because again, this is during COVID and right as soon as like my IRB was approved to start my research, that is when we got the notification in Colorado that the first COVID patient had got here. So there was a lot of like kind of pivoting that I had to do. Um so I ended up being able to do it virtual. I interviewed one person live in February because the COVID stuff precautions began in March. That was a really good interview, and then everything else I did via Zoom. But it was hard professionally. I think like, you can take all the methods classes you want and you talk about like gatekeepers and stuff, but they don't really talk about the well-earned distrust that a lot of those gatekeepers actually have. Because when I was reaching out to organizations, one of the first things they said was, I like this research. It's something that needs to be done, but we've been burned by too many other researchers asking us for help. And then, they produce something that demonizes them or re-traumatizes their clients and they don't want anything to do with you anymore, which is that's understandable. So that was something that I had to learn a lot of patience with and just make a vow to not ever be the person that they're talking about in the future. Professionally, it was it was really eye-opening to do research on a group that's the second most trafficked group in the United States, like per numbers. The first one is Native Americans. And to have so many people say like, oh yeah, we know that a lot of Black folk are being trafficked, but they don't come here. They're going to jail. And that was really heartbreaking to do. So professionally, I learned a lot about just how badly our anti-trafficking systems can miss Black victims, even if they're children, even if it's like a cut and dry case of trafficking, which it very rarely is. It's always much more murkier than you think it is. Um, and just how, because of that, how limited we are at knowing the unique experiences of the Black community, particularly for like what made them more vulnerable and how can we, what gave them the vulnerabilities traffickers were able to prey on, and how can we prevent those vulnerabilities so they don't have anything to prey on. Um, and that was really hard. And I did find a lot of stuff. And something else I learned too, which was pretty amazing, were how many people actually did forward my advertisement, my flyer to be interviewed just because I am Black. With a lot of people saying like we didn't want to because we were always worried about people pathologizing the Black community, which is a very real fear. Again, like that's legitimate. And that's also something too that a lot of the women who I interviewed said too, particularly those that said that they didn't have any anger towards their trafficker anymore. That
Mm.
was something that because most of them, the people I interview were like we call them survivor leaders in their field, so they lead anti-trafficking initiatives or like run their own nonprofit or something. And so many of them spoke about how often like they would get kind of like dissed by
Mm.
other folk in anti-trafficking because they didn't want to talk badly about their trafficker. They didn't, of course, they did not like their experience, but they always fell back into things like, I know his mom used to do the same thing to him, or I know this is considered normalized, and we'll look at more like cultural community level reasons why something like this can be normalized or missed. And they were afraid to have those conversations with someone who had not grown up in that culture because they were so used to, they didn't want to have someone do a think piece on them and say like, oh, it's because of hip hop, the influence of hip hop, which is something I still see in academic publications. I actually read one in an article last week of like, it's probably more prominent in the Black community because of hip hop. Don't get me started on that. But actually looking at larger structural issues that unfortunately we have to deal with. So professionally, that was something that was really eye-opening to me. You're always kind of told you may experience this, but to
Mhm.
actually experience it firsthand is like something else completely. Personally,
And before you said it goes back to what you said you saw in the magazine,
yeah.
where even when people go in, it's almost like they're Marlon Perkins on safari, going in and looking at the indigenous, whatever, and with
Mhm.
this sort of detached superiority. But and you really had to kind of carve your way through that. Um, and maybe in some ways, because of what you saw as a child, you were kind of uniquely qualified. Would that be inaccurate to say that, or because you didn't experience it, but
Yeah, I think so. And that was actually something a lot of the organizations that ended up helping me, both the first time, because I actually reopened the study last year to get more interviews for the book, and then I closed it again. Both rounds, like a lot of times they wanted to interview me first to make sure that I was a safe person for them. And I
Mhm.
would tell them the exact same thing I told you, like very honest and transparent. Like I was never trafficked myself. I'm not going to do like A, B, and C with this. This is the kind of environment I grew up in. And yeah, it was, I think like a lot of the folks that probably helped me out would probably agree as well, just because they were really wanting someone from the community itself to start talking and doing more research. And there are more of us now from like the Black community doing research. A lot of them are actually in social work and they do really good work too. But we're still so few. Like the vast majority that are still done on Black folk are either multicultural, and some that do focus just are primarily by people who have never been in our neighborhoods, who have never been in our communities, especially those who, like, when they're doing interviews, they don't know slang for some reason, or they don't know like what a verbiage actually means. So that is something that I think, yeah, I would agree. I think I usually hesitate in saying that because people then try to make it seem like I'm saying like I'm the only qualified expert when that's not all what I'm saying.
Mhm.
Saying that having a unique insight or a unique connection to the research can definitely provide more perspective that you may not otherwise get. Um, and that is also value too, because like within the academy, it's like it gets called me search, which is ridiculous. Because I have been accused of doing that, even though I myself have never been trafficked. So I don't think it would be considered me search anyway. But that is something that really gets you, especially because like in the academy, what we're supposed to do research for are recommendations for like policy, and but I don't want to make recommendations for policy. That's not my goal. My goal is to try to just change language and societal understandings, not policy. Policy is good and great. You like policy, we should always have policy. But you can't, if you just have policy without an understanding of the people that will be impacted by it, it's not going to do any good. So that's where I come from. And that's
Yeah.
where like the whole, you think you're better than other folks or you're doing research comes in, which, that's their thing to deal with, not mine.
Well, it's really funny. Years ago, I worked for a group of professors and at AAUP, and there was this debate about who should do cultural research.
Mhm.
And you could probably tell, I don't have to describe who it is. I can just say there are certain folks who thought that we couldn't do our own research because we were too close to it. So only they could do the research on us. And the response was, okay, good. So we'll be the ones to do research on you. Oh, no, 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 no. You don't know enough about that. You're not close enough to it. You can't do research on us. We have to do that too. That's, has that changed? And now this was
No.
30 years ago. That's the same dynamic you're running into, the same mindset.
That's the exact same thing. And it just comes down to them not wanting to say that they don't believe we belong there. That's
Yeah.
it. Um, I actually had that happen at a few conferences, like in 2021 or 2022, one of those 2 years. I don't know, it's been a long time. Say that. And I was like, just say you don't think I should be in here and that you don't think my PhD is worth anything. Just save us both the time.
Yeah.
And then he just like sputtered and didn't know what to say because people are also not used to blunt speak in the academy either. But yeah, no, it's the exact same thing. I think I would hope for younger generations of scholars that are coming out, maybe that'll change. Largely because I'm seeing more people who hadn't been in the past, more um, likely to say either they're ambivalent on the so-called me search or like the closeness or still question seriously the difference between objectivity, neutrality, and subjectivity, and if they even actually exist, which I don't believe any of
Mhm.
those exist really. Well, subjectivity does, but I don't think that there's any sort of research that you can truly be neutral to or objective to. Even if like you don't, like you say, like, oh, I'm far enough away for it, then you're usually going to be producing research that is just kind of aligning with those ideals that cause them to be subjugated in the first place. Because there's no such thing as neutral. You're either for something or you're against something or you're against something but are too cowardly to say it.
And your research, um, for a lot of people is very uncomfortable because of the nature of it. Talk about that and talk about, we know what kind of pressures you get from outside the community. How much pressure did you run into and pushback did you run into inside the community for doing the kind of research you were doing?
So all the in-community pressure I actually got were from other academics. So no one like community level has
Mhm.
ever said anything, at least to my face. It
Mhm.
was from a lot of other researchers, mainly Black men researchers who were just focused on, you know, is this going to further pathologize Black men or further cement the idea of Black male criminality because trafficking is an interpersonal crime, which means that we're usually trafficked by people who look like us and who are related to us or have intimate ties with us, which usually are other Black folk. And trying to say like it's not about trying to pathologize or criminalize Black men. I'm just stating the fact that this is a real problem within our community. But then there's also this unspoken elephant in the room that I will speak into existence is that, like you're saying, that because of how prolific racism is against Black men, we shouldn't talk about the gendered violence that we experience within the community. And it always reminds me of like struggles you hear about like during like the civil rights movement of saying like, oh no, we don't need to talk about A, B, and C. Let's just focus on getting like schools integrated and then voting rights, and then we can deal with everything else. But everything else never comes to fruition.
Ella
It's
Baker had other plans.
Yeah, Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer,
Right,
even
yep.
Rosa Parks, before MLK came on the scene. It was like we
Mhm.
had a and this is always shocking too, and tell people like, civil rights movement began a lot earlier than what we get taught in school, like going on to the late 1800s into what you have now. Or that Rosa Parks made a name for herself in the South and NAACP by investigating gender violence against Black women in Alabama and Mississippi. It's the exact same thing of just focusing and just having a narrow-minded view of what racism does and the impact racism has on the community, but only focusing on men and boys. And instead ignoring the fact that there are, unfortunately, people within the community that are actively making the choice to harm others, and we need to address that. I'm not calling for, further criminalization, but I am saying like we have a problem and we need to focus on that. Like I can talk about two things at once, but I never got the chance. I never get the chance to get that far into it because then I get accused of either like hating men, Then the next thing, it always is predictable comes like, oh, you're a lesbian. It's like, what? I'm still want to understand the logic behind that, but I don't have the time. But it always, but I have
Okay.
heard, yeah. Um, yeah, and I'll say like most black male academics that I've heard my research have been nothing but supportive, though I'll say that. But the few that have not been able to give me a lot of pushback just for that idea that, it's just going to make black men look worse. They never want to talk about, well, what about the pain and harm that's they are perpetuating onto another vulnerable group? And they don't want to really, and they're the same ones that'll tell like intersectionality but ignore the intersectionality that's happening within our conversations. So it's, yeah, but otherwise I will say I have not actually gotten any pushback
Mhm.
outside of that. I've had people like curious go and not actively like say anything positive about it, but nothing negative either. I
Yeah.
think maybe they're just neutral on it, or well, not
Yeah.
neutral because I don't think believe in neutrality, or just like okay, or they just don't say anything. But that's primarily where it has come. I'll say that the most vocal group that has been against it is not in the community. It was actually white women,
Really?
which is not surprising, because I can't tell you at least once a month I get something in my inbox about how, this is divisive, trafficking is a gender problem, all women are equally affected by it, and blah blah blah, or saying that I'm accusing them or an organization of being racist, and I never actually say anybody is being racist. So I will say that has been the group that has been very vocally disparaging, I suppose, of my work.
I was going to use the word. I won't use the K word. I'll move on from that. But
I
um, I do want to ask you this though. Has Diddy changed the conversation at all?
Um, so Diddy came at a time when there's like a break in academia. Um, I actually at the conference last week, there were a couple people who were talking about it, but I don't think that this is anything that was really not well known for a little while.
Yeah,
Everybody that I know that lives in California and deals in hip hop, just sounds so stereotypical, but has
that
always
I
been
know,
like,
right?
yeah, because like everyone's like, ah, no, everybody knows about Diddy. Everybody knows about Diddy. It's just that now the cops know about Diddy.
Mhm.
Um, I don't think that he has. The one conversation that came up a lot though before him was R. Kelly,
Oh,
especially after his trial in Brooklyn, and that was an interesting
mhm.
conversation. I think that the conversation that came up, we're talking more about like his own past of victimization, which is something we do need to address. And the fact that some of his victims were actually boys and men that never came forward. They're all unnamed. And just kind of talking about what this actually means for a predator to not particularly have a type, but just to enjoy exerting power. And for me, that was the best part that came out of it, was actually it put power back into this conversation.
Mhm.
It wasn't about him being bisexual or pansexual or anything or whatever his orientation is. It was about him having the ability to exert control and power over someone and getting pleasure out of that. That is something that has been really difficult to get into these conversations, because I think it comes down to more of like what we were saying a few minutes ago of like, well, what does this mean for like, black men who are criminalized and, everything else beyond that. For me, the R. Kelly conversation, at least from my observations of it, brought in how power functions and the power
Mhm.
of trauma as well, the long lasting influence of trauma. And then, of course, how quickly a community is to rally around a predator, and the power of parasocial relationships where people want to protect him while demonizing his victims who were right there, some of whom actually we all knew. I don't know if Diddy will have more of a conversation later on. I kind of feel like because he's Diddy, I think it's going to devolve into, and I hope to be proven wrong, it's going to be devolved into like the same conversation they had, like, but did he actually kill Biggie? That's something I have seen actually pop. It's like that's why he killed Biggie, was because Biggie knew what was going on.
Mhm.
Which I don't know, but one thing that I think too, because I know 50 Cent, because they're big rivals and they've never liked each other, he's supposed to be coming out with, he's said that he would pay, I don't know if this is true, if not, if he was just blowing smoke, want to do like a surviving Diddy, like surviving R. Kelly
Oh my
style.
goodness.
Yeah, the one
That would
conversation
be interesting.
it would be. I did see on Twitter, because I refuse to call it the other name. Because Dream Hampton, the one who produced the Surviving R. Kelly series, did consider Diddy a friend, and they were on there talking about, their disbelief at how hard it was, but they believe survivors. So she is going to believe the survivors and send them well wishes. And Dream Hampton was really getting into a good conversation about like what we do, how we handle when someone that we are close to is accused and we learn that we didn't know who they were. That was a really good conversation among like
Mhm.
documentary folk. So I was
Mhm.
like, can we have that conversation over here? Because like we all need this. So I think the Diddy conversation just hasn't started yet because it's still really new.
Mhm.
He is back in the States. I'm sure an arrest is imminent. So I suspect those conversations will start up. But like I said, I really do suspect the first of it is going to delve into the old hip hop wars. I think primarily too, because that's easier for people to digest, quite honestly. It's just easier for us to fall into the usual things that we always talk about, like, no, so and so's good. Um, like how people just like kind of focus, like there's very little, at least I think, like with the whole Kendrick Lamar and Drake.
Mhm.
Because Kendrick had a lot of good lines in there. Not all of his songs
Mhm.
are really brought into the conversation. I think it was just whichever one it was, not one of us or whatever that song is.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. I did hear that actually,
yeah, like
and
his
about
whole
what about his Drake's family.
Yeah,
Um,
it was like listening, and I don't really like music, so I was just reading the lyrics, but it was like a real read on how race socialization and colorism impacts, but also how even folks that are disavowed or choose not to engage with Blackness, how they can commodify that. It was a really, really good conversation, but what we got out of that were some cool TikTok videos, which admittedly were funny. Um, and not a really good deep dive into what it actually means for us in the community to sometimes want us to commodify our Blackness, especially if we are not very close to it. Because I don't know if people remember, like when Drake was first on Degrassi, it was like he was actively trying not to be too close to it, like way back in the day.
mhm.
Because I think people forget that Degrassi exists because that was so long ago. But like even that one album cover that he had with like the pins in his hair, I remember seeing that when I first came out and getting so angry because to me it just felt like it was mocking. And Kendrick thankfully gave us that. But like going back more to the point, Kendrick gave us a really, really good in-depth discussion about what this actually means and how people can act like Blackness is translational if you have the ability to opt out of it. Um,
Mhm.
not folks like him who like you, there's no ambivalence. You can look at Kendrick and be like, oh yeah, that's a brother. You can't do that. For people who don't have that luxury and they can pick and choose and they can act as a shield to them in ways, but the different privileges it gets them, it was it was good, honestly. I'd be like, this is like a textbook. This is like a book. But we kind of just like got it a little bit like, oh, but this was the best kind of bars. And I'm not talking about like society in general. I'm talking about like within the academic community. It was so interesting to me, like them wanting to eschew this really good in-depth conversation like racialization and things like that for a standard old hip hop conversation. I was like, okay. I do think that we'll probably see that same thing. I have to let my dog out. The same thing with Diddy for a while. Um, I really do think, though, we're going to have a good turning conversation once some of those court documents come to light when they actually do go on with the court proceedings. Um, what that'll look like, I'm interested.
Do we ever get, and this is the last question I'm gonna ask, because do we ever get to the point where we really believe the victims? Or is there always the yes, but that we have to deal with? Or is
I've
that the best we
always,
can hope for?
I, I, I don't think that's the best we can hope for. I think we should always push, and that's something that I always want to do too. Because one of the things that I always try to do when I talk about language is I'm very deliberate. And this is something that anti-trafficking abroad has used. And like now, anti-trafficking and a lot of police agencies won't use the term child prostitute. They'll say child prostituted child or victimized child or something else like that. They focus on the action,
Mhm.
not of the perpetrator, not on what they were forced to do, which is a major change, by the way.
Mhm.
So I think that it is possible. I think right now we're still in the yes, but phase. Um, Mainly because again, I think it's just it's easier for us to want to stay in this position where we can believe the people that we idolized. I really do believe that, like going back to R. Kelly, that a lot of people genuinely do believe what happened, that he did what he did. I don't think that you can see all that evidence, hear all the victims say things identical, victims that had never seen each other, especially the more popular that the Soulless book by Jim DeRogatis, it's a good book, wrote a good chronologically, like even before like the whole idea of cancel culture, way back in the 90s and 80s, before he was even famous, when we didn't even know him as R. Kelly, he was still doing it. He was still doing the same thing. And especially too, of listening to his lyrics, he never denies doing anything. So I do believe that a lot of people who defend him do believe it, but it's too difficult because to them, he's always been R. Kelly. He gave them music that got them through hard times. Maybe they're from the same neighborhood and they one day want to be able to believe that they can lift themselves out of poverty and become famous and rich. And it's hurtful. This is how powerful parasocial relationships are. Um, they don't know us, but we know them. And on some level, that brings us a level of comfort. And then when that comfort is disrupted, it does something within you. It can really be harmful. So I do believe that there are people internally deep down who say, I like fully do believe, but verbally what they're saying is that yes, but because that is what they need to get through whatever it is that they're dealing with that day. Will we ever be a victim blameless society? So I'm 35. If everything works out, I have another good like 40 to 50 years in me. Whenever
Or
that time
more.
expires, yeah. Whenever that time expires, I don't think that I'll die in a society that no longer has victim blaming. Honestly, I don't think that that's going to go away in my lifetime. But I'm seeing younger generations, like I'm talking about like kids in high school and junior high, when I'm able to observe, like they are more cognizant of language and they're more cognizant of these power dynamics that we were talking about. So I have a lot of faith that we can get there at some time. I think it's going to take a lot of time to get there, but I have faith that we will at some point. Come on in because you didn't even do anything. Um,
Oh,
dogs.
you should put the dog
So
on
I
camera.
now she's going away. Um,
Look, we
but
have a cat who loves camera time, and my wife is doing her shows. The cat's right in her lap. She gets up, looks in the camera, the whole nine yards.
oh, see, she's busy trying to find something to bark at because she loves to bark.
Oh,
Um, but I do think we will get there. Something I always try to say, like when I'm doing presentations or just talking, is that we don't focus on what victims were doing. We focus on what the perpetrators were doing to them at all times, and we use language to affirm that. So one of the things I always see is like, because a common thing for that people get shocked about when they learn about trafficking is that for a lot of victims, sometimes trafficking is just like a few hours out of their day. They can go to school, they can go to work, they may be able to
right.
hang out with friends or something else like that. And that's one of the reasons why people are usually shocked when they learn someone has been trafficked, because they're taught that it's always, you're always being held in a brothel, you're forced to be on the street all day, which is true for some victims, but not every trafficking situation looks exactly the same. And so for ones who were, able to do other things that they were able to do, there's such a disbelief that they're being trafficked because they'll be told like, well, why didn't you tell someone at school? Why did you go back after like they called you? Not understanding that the majority of power and violence comes psychologically. And I think we're getting better at understanding that process. And I think that once people have a better understanding of how the psychological control works, we'll be in a place where we can better understand victims and we can better start that's bad English. We can we can then do a better job as a society at shining that light on the perpetrator and what they
Right.
did versus what the victims were doing. So I think that once that happens, and I do think we're seeing a little bit of that change little by little, we'll be in a much better place. And I would like to see that before I die, but like I said, I don't have a lot of hope. Um, just maybe it's because me being pessimistic. I will say some of the information I got around, at least like some of the conversations like around Diddy when it first emerged with what everybody knew for a while, that he's a violent man and a predator. Even
Yeah.
then, there's still like a lot of like, oh, but, no, but there is.
Mhm.
And even too, like bringing up 50 Cent, the one of his co-stars on Power was sexually assaulted on camera of a woman who came up and grabbed his genitals and was rubbing, and he's physically giving a lot of discomfort. He's pulling away, his face changes, and he's just like, no, no, no. And if you look at his face, like it really looks like he's communicating like, someone please get this woman off me or drag me out. And no one does anything. It's like it's not hidden. He's in a room full of other people. And even with that, like even Diddy himself on I think it was Instagram. I don't have Instagram. Was like, oh, no charges are being dropped. He's fine. Calm down, geez. And like a few days ago, he was talking about like all the trauma from the victims of Diddy. So it's very selective with how we're talking about victims. But even like we're talking about him, with him being sexually assaulted on camera, but he probably wouldn't mind it if she was hot. But she didn't get to do anything. It was just some writing, but. And there's, more going on there with that. We were very bad at talking about male victim sexual assault, especially if the perpetrator is a woman. But it's still that exact same thing. We find little justification so we don't have to confront that, because this is really difficult behavior. I I have almost 30 interviews. I only have about half of them transcribed because I have to take breaks because it's really difficult. Like I sat with these women, with these survivors of trafficking who graciously gave me their time, sometimes for over an hour. One conversation was 3 hours. Um, and I'm just learning so much about the horrific things that they had to endure. And it takes a toll on you. It takes a really large toll on you. It's difficult to confront this information, especially, and I think too, with someone that looks so similar to you. Like one woman I interviewed was trafficked, and I actually found out that we grew up a few blocks away from each other during this time. When we were talking, I was like, oh wait, no, I know I lived in the neighborhood next to you all. And that was hard for me, because what's separating me from her? Very little, actually. Um, and that is just really, really hard for us to deal with. I think overall as a society, we are not mentally well. We're dealing with a lot, like even like larger factors, like we're in a bad economy. It's not good. People are scared. We're still dealing with the fallout of like this global trauma that was COVID. Even if people are COVID deniers, there's still something very traumatic about living through a global pandemic that is still very much active, and a potential new one with what's going on with other diseases and what's going to appear later on with how we're doing deforestation and more contact with animals. Everything going on, different conflicts, different genocides happening around the globe. Always a possibility for getting into World War III. There's a lot happening. And I do think, and I'm not a psychiatrist, so, take this as a grain of salt. For some of us, these are defense mechanisms because it's easier than us facing the truth that we have a major problem that we could tackle. But to do that, we need to start confronting and acknowledging that these things are happening. And we don't want to say that, because if you dig deeper, then maybe some of the people that are doing it are your father, your uncle, your
Yeah.
brother. And then what do you do? It's hard. We're humans. We are very fragile emotionally and physically in a lot of ways, but it's urgent that we do that, because that but is what tells victims that what you went through doesn't matter. And that is the goal of what I'm trying to do, is trying to make sure that is trying to change enough or inspire enough local wise, community wise, so that we stop saying but, so that victims don't walk away feeling like, one of the most common things that people tell me, not just the trafficking research, but other research too that I do, because I do all gender violence, is that, nobody believed me, so I probably deserved it, or it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. And both of those things are pretty horrific. So that's my goal. That's my soapbox.
And that really is the answer to the second question about the personal aspect of it. I mean, you know, it's actually refreshing to hear someone who, I don't want to say take joy in the work, that is so committed to a work, because it seems like some people do it as a photo op, ooh, look at me, I'm really cool, I'm doing the cool thing right now. But that's not what I'm getting from you. And I'm breaking protocol, but I really wanted to say how much I admire the work you're doing. I'm, I'm, yeah, I'm hoping for a better day. And maybe because I come up in the 60s and 70s, I still have that little tiny bit of hope, but I'm going to hang on to that bad boy, because, you folks kind of give me that hope. So I thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Um, okay, well, you went to Sam, yeah, well, we're at Sam Houston, but now you're coming back, quote, home. Talk a little bit about Sam Houston, and talk a little bit about coming back to the Denver area, or the Colorado area.
So I'll preface by saying I absolutely loved working at Sam Houston. I loved my coworkers. The students were fantastic. Um, I had no complaints about it. And actually I've quit plenty of jobs before and I never felt anything, but this is the only time I can say I actually felt sad having
Mm.
to put in my letter of resignation. I was even told my chair, I was like, I didn't want to, but this was hard. But ultimately, I had to leave from also get to. So Sam Houston was, I think, a really good place to start off my career as an academic, because I think I said I'm first generation, and first generation means that, neither I have no family that went to college, of my parents at least. Academia is an insular world. People get through by networks, and a good majority of those networks are because they were introduced by their family members. So I didn't have that. I'm already at a disadvantage. But I'm plucky and I'm determined for things. And they had a lot of really good research institute. So I worked really closely. It's called Crime Victims Institute, CVI for short, run by the a wonderful woman whom I absolutely adore her, and had great students working in there as well. They did so much to connect me with local resources and people all around the state that were great with helping me learn more about trafficking and really broadening my view. That was something that was really wonderful. And like I said, I love the students. I love teaching them. They were very curious. It was weird because, like, I think it's a Southern thing though, because they were very adamant about not calling me Cassie or anything. It was always like Dr. So and so. And it was like, to me, I always feel like that creates a distance, especially for the other first gen students, because like I want them to see me as a potential colleague, which to me means like you gotta see me as like I'm not that much different than you. I'm just, farther along the academic ladder. But I got to something to compromise by calling me Dr. Cassie, which was so nice. Um,
Oh.
and he, so they were a great bunch of students, and I really did miss them. I wasn't able to go to graduation for it, and I was so sad. But it was a really good job. It was great. I adored it. The problem came from the state. Um, so I'm sure you've heard of the different laws that were going on in the Texas legislation around higher education. One of those that was not passed was a critical race theory bill that did not pass the House. Supposedly it's supposed to come back on. I don't know, but wouldn't shock me if it was. But just the ways that they were trying to regulate talking about, oh wait, no, it did pass. Sorry, forgive me. It was a 10-year bill that didn't pass. So it did actually pass. It was a bill to get rid of tenure, basically, that didn't end up passing, but that's on the chopping block again next year. But it was really seeking to change how we talk about certain horrors of like what happened in the past. One of the classes I used to teach was multiculturalism in the criminal justice system, and you can't talk about the criminal justice system without talking about slavery. Like, it emerged because of slavery. You can't deny this. There's historical artifacts. There's literally documents you can go and look at on your own in and the Congress. So you can't deny that this is actually a fact. I had never had any student who took that class, and the majority of people, students who took it were white. Not a single one of them ever felt like I was attacking them for being white. None of them ever felt like, the class was racist. We had good but tough discussions. They were always very respectful, and it would annoy me because like these are adults. They're curious. They want to learn. My class was an elective. No one was forcing them to take it, but they chose to because they wanted to learn more. And just the possibility that that would keep getting whittled down to what I could and could not talk about, I couldn't handle it. But I was more worried about the research aspect. And I had full faith that my department would protect me. So I'll get that out of the way. I do have faith. What I don't have faith with is that my research requires money, and I need to get funding for that. I did not want to be hindered by potentially not getting grants to pay people for talking with me, because I paid the women $100 for their time. I did not want to risk having to water down or limit what I was doing because of it. But I think something that people don't realize too is that law actually didn't restrict just in education. It was overall in any institution that took public money. Some, I won't mention their names, of course, but a lot of the nonprofits that I had developed relationships with that were willing to help me before said that they were afraid to because they didn't want to risk losing their funding. And that's a very, that's understandable. I wasn't about to try to pressure them to possibly risk them getting their funding. Nonprofits need funding. It's their lifeblood, and they require a lot of donations and support from the state. So I was not going to try to pressure them to change that. But was just like the general hostility to talking about the past. The cut of DEI initiatives, which did cut a lot of potential activities and professional data activities I could do overall. It was just really difficult trying to be an educator in that state with what's happening. So I, and what actually sparked this was I participated in the Intersectional Qualitative Research Methods Institute in University of Maryland College Park. Excellent, recommended highly. I wish I could do it again. During like a exercise, I had a little breakdown of where I started to like cry and I just dismissed myself. And I had a one-on-one with the person that I just like kind of focused on because he was asking the question. I was just targeting. I was like, you are now emblematic of everything I'm upset about, and you're gonna take it. So I was like apologizing to him the next day, and he was so gracious and understanding. But he said, he's like, you really shouldn't burst into tears talking about your job.
Mm.
And that was kind of, and he was like, maybe it's time for you to leave. And that was a hard decision, but ultimately I had to acknowledge that they're right and that the unhappiness that was starting to go because there was such an air of hostility. It was just getting more and more dim to think about doing my kind of work specifically in a state like Texas, even though like all the nonprofit folks, even a lot of the police officers I was interacting with were like, this is good. This is all 100% true. It was just getting really, really hard. And I always had that specter over my head. I was like, I'm terrified of having to have like that one inquest into my work or, getting onto the wrong person's radar just because I'm talking about enslavement in the criminal justice system. So I made a very hard decision to go on the job market
Mm.
and got it at DU. DU had a call out for it was actually it's not a crim program, it's a program for gender, women, sexuality studies.
Mm.
Um, they had a call out for someone who did like critical race theory, critical race feminisms, and that's all what I do. And I actually thought I blew it because on the day before I was supposed to fly out for my job interview for the job talk and the teach out, I learned that my left lung had collapsed. So I was like, you can't get on a plane with a collapsed.
No, 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 no.
So
Mm.
I like emailed the chair and I was like, so I can't. And I honestly thought that I was going to be like, well, too bad. So sorry next time. But no, they agreed to move everything on Zoom. And to me, that was like a big red flag that they were A, very empathetic, that they are very understanding, and B, that they are very adaptable, which is something that I think most departments really need is like more adaptability with things. So did it, it was good. And then a couple of days later, I got the call that they wanted me. And I said, yeah.
Well,
So it was
well,
good.
although even though I'm saying this from Baltimore, welcome back home to Colorado.
No, you can never really truly leave, I've learned because it was funny. I like try to think about the place where I was like happiest the most, not just as an academic, but as a person. And my whole family is here. And my mother also came with me to Texas too, and she was missing family too. So I limited it to only job opportunities in Colorado. And I've been here for about a month, little over a month probably. And I have been incredibly happy. I've been more productive. I've been able to write better because another thing that happened too within like the last 6 months, it was so hard for me to write there. I was like full of anxiety and I just couldn't concentrate. And now I've just been like, whoosh. So it's been good.
Hey,
So I'm very happy. I got to meet my new people in person last week. They were very warm and sarcastic. So my kind of people.
ooh, you're gonna have a good time.
I know. I was like, yes, we do these jokes. I love it. And I just love to like I was also a double major in women gender studies and as undergrad, and they had a little cottage, the Hazel Woodruff cottage, and I just love it. It's such a cute little thing. And we have the same thing. It's larger than a cottage, but it's like our own little building. And I just love how intimate it feels. There's a piano in the lobby, there's just students hanging out and having coffee and talking. And I was like, this is great. But more, I got to talk to some students and just see them and just the passion they had for learning and just like eating it up and engagement was wonderful because that was something else I started to notice too was that I think that it was really subtle and I don't know if Sam Houston will ever have a conversation about it, but for me, I kind of felt like I started to see students disengage a little bit with learning, and I do believe it had a lot to do with like the change in how we talked about education in the state, because that was something that a lot of my students talked to me about too. Is like, well, can we do A, B, and C? And you can tell like they were absorbing some of it, and just seeing some students just have their passion just whittled out was so heartbreaking. Um, and I can only do so much as one person with very little resources. So it was good. I look forward to teaching in the fall quarter. And I am very happy again for the bus system because I don't have to drive the whole time. Because I
Man,
will say there was something that really bothered me about living in Sam Houston because I lived in Houston itself. Sam Houston is in a town called Huntsville, about an hour north. there's no bus system there at all. So I had to drive that all the time. And I don't mind driving, but at the same time, I was like, sometimes I want to just sit back and read or take a nap, which you can't do when you're driving. And thankfully, there's a bus from Longmont to Denver that I can just chill out with, do my reading, some work, or take a nap.
No, this is my last question. I think when we talked a little while ago, we said there's always that last question. But you're in that weird situation because you're halfway between. Because normally I ask people, because they're all old like me, what advice do you give to the 18-year-old you? So I'm going to give you an even harder one.
Oh,
One, what would you tell the 18-year-old, and what would you tell the 60-year-old?
mm, what was I doing at 16? I was depressed. I think because my depression was such a big deal at 16, I kind of internalized it a much longer than I should have. And I projected in ways that I really shouldn't have. I think I probably actually wouldn't say anything to 16-year-old me. I probably would just like offer to listen to whatever she wanted. And because the turning point for me when I was 16, actually was when I was 16, it was when I was like 18 or 19, was that I just finally found a therapist that just listened. And that meant the world. So that's actually what I do. I wouldn't say anything to her because she didn't need to be talked to. Everybody was talking to 16-year-old me. And I already knew who I wanted to be and what I was capable of then. I just had so many doubts that I could be who I am right now. So I would instead just listen to her because that's really what she needed. And then if after she was done talking, maybe I might talk to her a little bit. But first I would just give her that chance to find her voice that was temporarily gone again. Because I will say I felt very voiceless from the ages of like 15 to 23, just because of how bad the depression was. It really wasn't until I actually started doing more research where I was able to actually find it again. Um, and that's really what helped me out going forward. The 18-year-old me, yeah, what was I doing at 18? 18 was when I started doing the community college. I think I would tell her A, to be more financially responsible. Um, I think that honestly, as silly as it sounds, I think I actually would tell her to start when I started to work, like try to do a little bit of credit, honestly, because I got kind of a late start on that, and now it's like really come home to roost for that. But other thing I'll tell 18-year-old me was that I don't need to be brave all the time, and that I don't always need to take burdens all at once, and that it was perfectly fine if I wanted to rest. Because I always felt when I was 18 that I had to do everything and I had to be everything at once, mainly because I wanted to make sure that I was making my mother proud. Because I'm not gonna be humble here. Like I am intelligent. I am a smart individual and I was back then too. But I always felt I was really disadvantaging myself because I felt like I had to do everything else. Like I had to be what I thought the kind of daughter that my mother needed, mainly with like being quiet and not letting a lot of things that were bothering me come up to the surface, do all this work and everything else like that. But to just tell her, like, your mother is always going to love you unconditionally. It's okay if you just focus on one thing and to stop muting yourself because you're worried people aren't going to like you.
This is I promised one more, but I lied. Um, um, when you're retired, who are you then?
When I'm retired, still me.
What have you what would you have accomplished? What would you say to her, that woman?
The retired me,
Yeah.
I would ask if all the books that I have planned got published. And then I would ask, did you ever open up the nonprofit for Black women, for the Black community that you always wanted? Because that's one of my end goals, actually. Like I want tenure and everything else like that. But one of the things that I really want to do is to go back to well, where the neighborhood is now because it got gentrified and everybody got pushed out. But go to where the new one is and open up a much needed trafficking center. So my goal is to try to find some way to keep that financially sound. And I wouldn't run it. I would just basically be like the person to give it money. I would like to employ survivor leaders to run it because nobody knows what survivors are going through than other survivors themselves. So I would like to have a really good balance and let them have autonomy because that's one thing I learned actually doing this research was how often they were employed because people wanted the expertise of survivor leader, but they never wanted to listen to them. So I would like to do the exact opposite of that and just basically be the person, the piggy bank. So that is what I would ask. And then I would also ask too if she felt accomplished with changing the language and just doing some small community level change. And if she didn't, why, so that I could try to fix what she was not able to.
Thank you, Doctor. I appreciate you. Dr. Young, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you. Me too.
Be well, my friend.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.